This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Rabbi, we have a very interesting topic this afternoon. Will probably be a many-part series about a very controversial story that is brought down in Tiferes. I'm sure you've heard about it over the years, in part. I'm sure never like this. There is a somewhat well-known comment that is made in the commentary on Mishnayos, the Tiferes Yisroel. Tiferes Yisroel, I believe, was a Talmud of Rabbi Kiva Eger, and his name was Rabbi Yisroel Lifshitz, the Av Bezdin of Danzig, and he's actually going on the line in the Mishnah, Tov Shabaroifim L'Gehenim, that the best doctors, they go to the purgatory. I have somebody very close to me, so when they asked them, are you going to a good doctor? He said, I try to avoid the good doctors, But the question is, what does that mean? The best of the doctors go to Gehenna. What about the mediocre ones? Where do they go? And what does that mean? That sounds like a very critical statement. And we know a lot of great people were doctors. The Rambam, the Ramban, and other great Rishonim, they're all physicians. What does it mean, Tov Shabaroifim L'Gehenim? So on that line, there's a commentary of the Tiferes Yisroel. He says, "Nerali de'ein maimers at gnai l'roife." We're not disparaging the doctors. Rak shvach haroife hamumcha. We're praising doctors based on something. Amashmatzasi davar nechmad. Kasav davar nechmad. I found a very beloved thing. Shekshahoitzi Moshe Rabbeinu l'Shem l'Somim Tzayim. When Moses took the Israelites out of Egypt, Shamu amim yirgazin, all the nations trembled. V'yismu ma'oid al zahu ish Moshe. They all wondered about this Moses. Through him all these miracles were performed. A certain Arab king was inspired. He sent an artisan and to take a picture of Moses, to make a portrait of Moses and to bring it to him. And the artisan went. And he made this, he painted Moshe. He brought it before the king. And then the king brought his experts. And he asked his chachamim to use the art of face reading, to read the lines on Moses' forehead and the creases in his chin and on his cheeks, and to try to determine and plummet his personality. What is his character? How is he able to perform all these miracles? He's the great all-time leader. Let's study leadership from the qualities of Moshe. And all the sages unanimously responded to the king, and they said, if we need to make a judgment of the character of this great person, we'll have to tell you, he is no good. He's arrogant. He's money hungry. He has no discipline. This person, every bad trait that a human being could have, he has it. The king got very angry. You're mocking me. I heard the whole world knows he's Moshe Anav Moed. And as Rabbeinu Yonah says, the same way Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest in humility, he likewise excelled in every character trait. And everybody was shaken. Everybody sort of excused themselves. The artisan said, what do you want from my life? I did my best job. I thought I captured him properly. And the Chachamim said, look, they put everything on the artisan. They said, in other words, the artisan said these guys are obviously interpreting it wrong. They can't read, they can't face read. And the face reader says, well, obviously the guy can't paint. Everybody threw the blame on somebody else. But obviously they didn't paint Moshe properly. The king wanted to know who got it right. Was it the painter who painted right, or was it the face readers who read it right?
It's another group.
So he went, he traveled from Arabia with his cavalry, and he made it to the Machne Yisrael. Ubibaye, when he got there, Vayisa ina vayares Moshe ishal akim meirachik vayimar vayikach es atzir mitech chitznai. He took out the picture. V'yabet, and he looked at the picture. V'hinhu kitmunasai ukitzalmai kashatzira etzar koilea el asara v'layachta. He hit it nail on. The artisan portrayed Moshe Rabbeinu. It was a spitting image. Vayofeg liboy, his heart skipped a beat. Vayifla vayisma ad moed. Vayilach vayov atzmei oil ishal akim. So Moshe brought him into his tent. He served him tea and crackers. Vayichra v'yishtachav al apav. He bowed down to him. And he relayed to Moshe Rabbeinu everything that happened. Vayomer oid, bi'adoini ishal akim. Hineni koidem ro'isi panecha b'nei elikim amarti. I thought before I saw you, ulai hatzayer shagav v'malachtai. Maybe the artisan made a mistake. Because my face readers, who are very proficient in Chachmas Ha, does anybody know what the name of this discipline is? Physiognomy. Right? That's what it's called, and that's what he writes over here, physiognomy. I see that they hit a nail on. It must be that my sages, Chachmas Apartzuf, they obviously were traitorous to me and they were deceived me. They're obviously foolish. They fooled me. And Moshe spoke up and he said, Loi Cain. No. The artisan, good job. The physiognomist, nail on. Gam atzayer, gam chachamecha, neflam him b'yidasam chachamas. Ulam dalacha. You should know. Ki lulei hayisi b'teva v'emes, k'fi sheshamat mimidoisai. If my nature would not have been what you heard about me, I'm no better than a piece of stick. Because the stick also does not have the deficiencies of man. Meaning, if I would be lacking beteva, according to what you heard about me. In other words, if it were not true that I am lacking in everything, then I'd be like a piece of stick. In other words, if I would not be arrogant, and I would not be money hungry, and I would not be selfish, then I would be just I'd be a table. Table is also not money hungry. It's also not selfish. The table is very nice. It holds the Gemara. It might be itchy. It doesn't scratch. It says, "Oh no, you take the Gemara and I have to scratch my head." No, the table is also not selfish. The table is also not money hungry. You know, people put money on the table. Didn't take it just now, right? So I would be like a stick, says Moshe Rabbeinu. However, says Moshe, he says like this: Ki gam mimenu nimnu neftu chesed adam. V'imkein hachi ba'avar zeh eya yak bein elkim adam. If I would be born without deficiency, why would God like me? Amnam ken yidi shino lo evo shalom alachem. I'm embarrassed to tell you. Ki kol hachesronis asher shaftu alai chachamecha. All of the deficiencies and shortcomings that your chachamim see in me, kulam kshurim bi b'teva. I all have. Every bad quality, that's me. They didn't really get it right. I'm much worse than they said. But me in my strength, with my discipline and my perseverance, I overcame. I conquered them. I squelched them. Until I acquired all good qualities that they became second nature to me. That's why I'm honored in heaven. In other words, says Moshe Rabbeinu, you want to know my nature? By nature, I'm arrogant, selfish, jealous, immodest. But I overcame everything, and now I conquered all my bad traits, and that's why who I am today. Well, says the Tiferes Yisroel, now we can understand why the good doctors are going to Gehenna. Why? It doesn't say the kosher doctors, like it says the kosher butchers. That means when we say Tov Shabaroifim, Tov doesn't mean the good ones. Tov means the ones that think they're good. A doctor who thinks he's a good doctor is going to a very hot place. Why? Because that means they're so smug and they're so arrogant and they're relying on their yediyah and they don't consult with their associates and on very serious issues, and in their great gaiva, they don't realize, maybe they're making a mistake, and someone's life will be on their hands, and they're not careful to look it over in their books before they give a prognosis. So a doctor who thinks he's a toiv, a doctor who thinks he's a good doctor, is going to be very well done. Shelo Gehenim. Okay, but in any event, we have this story that is printed by Tiferes Yisroel, who is certainly a gadol Yisroel, and he's writing very frightening things about Adonai Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest man who ever lived. The question is this true? Do we accept this? Is it accurate? Now, one thing you should know is, he was not the only one to accept this as fact. There were some other Gedolim who did, and one most notably is in one of the Sefer Chasidus, the Sefer Ach Pri Tvua, of Reb Tzvi Hersh Friedman, on the pasuk V'ata Tzaves Bnei Yisrael V'yiklei Lecha Shemen Zayis. He quotes the Tiferes Yisroel, and who says that the Chachmei Umayis Ha'olam feel that a person can only acquire perfection if he achieves muskalos, if he achieves correct attitudes and thoughts. However, how could a person acquire perfection by doing physical actions? Let's say by wearing tefillin, by putting on tzitzis. How will a person acquire shleimus? But says Rav Tzvi Hersh Friedman, the truth is, person could acquire shleimus through the mitzvahs of the Torah, and by doing them, he is actually converting physicality to spirituality. And this is the great mal of Klal Yisrael, and that's why they're called Adam, because they take the Adama and they turn it into Adama le'elyon. And then he says, I heard this medrash that somebody drew a picture of Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, you got it head on, but by doing mitzvahs, I transformed it. So says Rav Tzvi Hersh Friedman, v'chein gam kein gabe shemen zayis. Likewise, by the shemen zayis matzinu shehazayis goyrem hashikcha. Zayis, oil, right? The olive causes you to forget. V'hashemen, right? The olive causes you to forget, and the oil causes you to remember. V'nei hamenoira is a remez to the Torah and the mitzvahs. Therefore Hashem says, V'ata tetzaves b'nei Yisrael v'yikchu elecha. Dahainu, meaning, just like you transform from bad to good, so too shemen zayis. Shemen zayis, you take the zayis which makes you forget, and you turn to shem which helps you remember. Lahalois ner tamid. And this is the meaning of the pasuk V'ata tetzaveh hadahu dechsev tikra v'anochi encha l'maseh decha tichsoif. And says Reb Tzvi Hersh Friedman, this is all based on the comments of the Tiferes Yisroel, that Moshe Rabbeinu by nature had bad character and bad midos, and he overcame it.
What does it mean, the second line of Moshe Mitzvot Kosu? Why does it mention the source?
I found written.
What?
He doesn't say where he got it.
And second question, why is it that if a person changes, why doesn't get etched into his appearance? Why does it remain with the original way if a person changes it?
You could change the character, but you're not going to change your facial features. The facial features remain the same. Marva Avoisai, do we believe that this in fact is true? And the answer is absolutely not. We do not accept this at all.
So why does it have validity?
It's not accepted. So you say, really? I heard this one, I heard that one. You never heard the Shiur. After you hear the Shiur, you'll tell me if you still accept it. There was a kuntrus written over 100 years ago. The name of the kuntrus is Klil Tiferes, and it's called Klil Tiferes on this piece of the Tiferes Yisroel. And the Sefer Klil Tiferes had the Haskamas of Gedolei Yisrael, and also has in it the arguments of the greatest Gedolei Yisrael at the time, who they summarily reject this. If you look in the title page of the Sefer Klil Tiferes, he says, "B'kuntrus hazeh," in this kuntrus, "Banu lahoyer," came to question on that which the Torah testifies on Moshe Rabbeinu, that he was by nature a mixture of good and bad. The Torah says what? That Moshe Rabbeinu, from the time he was born, kolol mikol tov. He included everything that's good. This sefer is based on the pasuk in the beginning of the Parsha. It says, look at number 4. Vatar ha'isha, the woman conceived. Vateled bein, she gave birth to a child. Vatera oisai, and she saw kitayvu. She's good. Now, what does the Torah mean that Moshe Rabbeinu was good? What is the Torah trying to say that she saw that he was good? Says the Tiferes, which was written by Reb Chaim Yitzchak Aroin Rappaport, the Moritz Tzedek of Vilkamir. He says, when the Torah says Ki Toivu, is that he had every dimension of good. Ki Ikar Mahus HaToiv Shazacha, Per Shulanu Rabbi Seinu, the Balei Gemara, the Balei HaZoyar, that he was Zoicha from the time he was born, that he had Ruach HaKodesh from the time he was born. The Shechina was with him from the time he was born. He had many Malos BaKodesh, that it was Zoicha from the time he was born, and he was Mekobel B'chol Yisrael Midar Vadar. However, about 50 years ago, one of the Gedolei Hadar, and we're not going to take away from the Gedolei Hadar, and that is namely the Tiferes Yisrael, he copied a segment from the end of Meseder Nashim, a letter that he found, and we don't know who wrote it, and there it says about Moshe Rabbeinu that he was a bad cookie when he was born. And, however, says the author of the Tiferes, this printed entry of the Tiferes Yisrael has two disastrous effects. Number one, because it's sheker v'chazav. It's wrong. The Torah says not like that. We're not saying it couldn't have been true. It happened to be. The Torah says Moshe Rabbeinu was wonderful from the time he was born. And second of all, it's Mavazeh Kadosh Yisrael. Tiferes Yisrael. It's Mavazeh Tiferes Yisrael. And therefore, all the Geonim of our Dar, we'll see who they were endorsed this Sefer, that this entry of the Tiferes Yisrael came from some bad source, from some chanic, and that's why he doesn't want to say where he got it from. And that is what this kuntrus is based on. Okay, Mar Rabbi says you'll see for yourself whether you accept, whether the evidence to show that this is something that we don't believe in. You'll judge for yourself. Okay.
But if you say as he was born with Mizu, then he had no Bechir Chavshis.
Who said he had Bechir Chavshis? He had Bechir Chavshis. Maybe everyone except for Moshe.
Why does the Torah praise him? Each one of them called on. What's
so
the praise?
We'll see.
If it's not his own doing, what's to be praised?
We'll see. It's a far cry from someone who's born as arrogant and selfish.
So why was he punished for a mistake? Why was he punished? If he
Let's see. Okay. So one of the haskamas given for this Sefer Tiferes was from somebody by the name of Eliyahu David Te'umim. Anybody who knows who that is? Eliyahu David Te'umim Rabinowitz. Aleph Daled Taf Reish. Who's that? The Aderes. Rabbi Yahu, David, Rabinowitz, Te'umim. The Aderes. The shul here in the neighborhood. Aderes Eliyahu. Rabbi Teitz was related to the Aderes. The Aderes, by the way, was the father-in-law of Rav Kook. So he gave a haskama to the Sefer, and he also agrees that this story about the Tiferes Yisrael, that the Tiferes Yisrael brings, is sheker v'chazav. So he writes over here, regarding this Sefer, on number 5, in the paragraph that begins, V'hinei anvasoi tarbeni lishal atzosi v'daiti v'davar asher olav mashal l'fan l'hadfes ma'av. You want to know my opinion regarding this story? He says, Samachti ma'od ki matzasi chaver. I'm very happy I found a friend here. You did libi malas kvoid tarasai sheyichya. B'davar asher me'oidi me'oz v'isikem zeh d'vasar. I always saw this in the Yisrael. Nitzta'arti ma'od. I was pained by it. V'kamabamim ga'arti. V'amadabrim is I always screamed at anybody who quotes it over. V'amarti b'kolam ki b'mechila m'kvoid agoyin d'ver Yisrael b'mechilas kvoidoi lo yafa asa v'ateka divrei atik al tzadika shal olam. I don't know why he brought down this comment. Misifrei amloy is it comes from Christian sources. Asher chazal omru aleim asher pm diber shav. They're all a bunch of shaitim. He says, now that you're printing the Sefer, Nasati Simcha B'Libi, that you're finally trying to print the Das of Chachamenu Zocharim Levracha against this nonsense from these Sfarim. Well, I say, Ya'asher Chelei V'yamitz Hashem Koichoi, you're doing a good thing. Fine. Now, but here's the question. Is it really shaming Moshe Rabbeinu? Who's better? Somebody who was born an angel, or somebody who was born with tendencies for rishus and overcame it? Well, let's discuss the following. Who's better, Baal Tshuva or Tzaddik Amar?
What it says?
Who's better, Baal Tshuva or Tzaddik Gomer? The Gemara says, yeah, that was the Gemara's Hafamina. No. The Gemara concludes not like that. Everybody likes to say over, but Makim Shval Tshuva. Yeah, that's one opinion. There's Machlekes Amaram, and the Gemara Paskins, Tzaddik Gomer is better. So, to make... No, nothing against Balei Tshuva. It's just, they'll be in a good place. It's just, but Tzaddik Gomer is better. In fact, the Chavos Havavos is Machriya that it depends what kind of Aveira they did. A guy who missed Zman Kriya Shema one time and he did Tshuva, maybe he'll be better than Tzaddik Gomer. But somebody who's a murderer and he did Tshuva, he's not better than somebody who never murdered. No.
That he can do tshuva, he can do right.
Even if you do tshuva, let's say the Mechayim Mesim, let's say, or let's say whatever. The Chavos Havav says doesn't apply for serious averos. We're not saying
The guy in the Gemara who did all the averos in the world, all the women in the world, they did tshuva one time, and Basko came out. Rabbi, what's his name? Rabbi,
he says Basko went out. You went to Olam Haba, but there are a lot of people in Olam Haba. You're not. There are a lot of rabbis. You teach someone the letter Gimel. You're a rabbi, but it doesn't mean you're better than Moshe Rabbeinu.
Baskol come out for every person. How many people comes over because of the Baskol?
You don't, some people... Bottom line, it doesn't matter what we think. The Gemara concludes Tzaddik Gomer is better. But this has nothing to do with it. Because now the shaila is, nobody ever said Moshe Rabbeinu did Navera. But the question is, who's better? Someone who has tendencies to do the wrong thing and overcomes it, or someone who doesn't have tendencies for it?
Obviously someone has tendencies. Who doesn't have tendencies, but Hashem made him like this.
So, the Rambam in the Shemaina Prakim, has a famous stira. Because in one place, the Chazal say that a person shouldn't walk by a treif store and say, "Ugh, disgusting." A person should say, "I love this food, but what can I do?" So that implies it's good to have a tendency to do the wrong thing and overcome it. But then the Rambam says, does it make sense that it's good to have a tendency? I wish I could. This guy, I want to wring his neck, but I'm gonna take a deep breath. And I'm not going to kill the guy across the table from me. That's how you should walk around? I wish I could... No. So the Rambam says as follows. Things that are human vice, like selfishness and arrogance and jealousy, you should not have a tendency. It's not better to have a tendency and overcome. It's not better... It's better not to... Let me tell you. It's better not to have a tendency. Mashein came treif. Treif, there's nothing wrong with treif. It's only because Hashem said not to do it. So that you should kataka have a tendency for. So now we want to know, we're talking about Moshe's character here. We want to know, was Moshe Rabbeinu born an angel, or did he have tendencies to do bad things? So to say he had tendencies to do bad things, the Rambam says that's not the highest level. So you're not doing Moshe Rabbeinu any favors to promote this story. So therefore, the Adara says like this: Asher Kasav.
Say different. The same say all the midas which a person has to work in them until this going to come. All the different Musa, Chavis Alvova, Shari Tshuva, and all Tzadikim all talk about midas rois.
Yeah, look, everybody has midas rois, but it's better not to have them in the first place.
But you're born. We have no choice.
Okay, but now we do have a choice. Are we doing Moshe Rabbeinu a favor to promote this story about some Arab king who hired a portrait and they drew him that really Be'etzim is a Baal Gaiva and a Baal? No. So he says like this: Asher Kasav Yedidi Ki Yitu b'Mashi Yedamu Shebezeh Nichbad Yoser Shtebal Tshuva Adif Mitzadik Amor. That if you're going to make the case that wait a second, maybe this is a Maila Moshe Rabbeinu, because if he overcame his tendencies about Tshuva is better. First of all, says Adaris, it's wrong. It's just a misconception. People say b'makom shebalei Tshuva. We don't paskin that way. Be'emes halacha Rabbi Yochanan that Tzaddik Gomer Adif. So he says Adaris, that's true. That's correct. Nobody argues about that. Everybody agrees Tzaddik Gomer is better. But the issue here is not. We're not making Moshe Rabbeinu into about Tshuva here. We're just discussing what's his inherent character trait. That's only if you did an avera, b'ched v'shemedarkai. Bezehu adif mimalas hatzadik hagomer. The man omer about Tshuva is adif. That's if a person sinned and then he overcame it. But here we're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu. Nobody said he did an avera. There's no shaykhs to that sugya. This is the sugya of the Rambam. Who's better? Someone who's koiveshis Yitzroy or someone who didn't have the Yitzar? Okay, so bottom line is that the Tiferes says you're not doing Moshe Rabbeinu any favors, and he, based on the following, wants to prove that this story is made up, is sheker v'chazav. What's the proof? 2 Gemaras. This is what the Tiferes brings. We have one Gemara in Masechet Megillah Daf Yud Aleph. It says a pasuk, Hu areinu Moshe, hein b'tzidkon mitchilasan v'yat soifan. They were righteous from beginning until end. That means from the moment they were born until the end of their life, they were tzaddikim. So you say, okay, nobody's saying Moshe wasn't a tzaddik. The question is just what his nature was. And then he brings the Tosefta and Krisos. You know, it always says Moshe before Aaron. The Tosefta says that sometimes it always says Shamayim before Aretz. One time it says Aretz first. It always says Avraham the first of the Avos. One time it says Yaakov first. It always says Moshe before Aaron. One time it says Aaron first. From here we learn they're shkulim. So, wait a second. From the fact that it says Havayasa Yehe Mitchila V'Yatsoif, that obviously is not like these Malizim, these Bali Lashon Hara, that Moshe was B'Teva Ra and he overcame his Yetzer Hara and he tried to do better. So he says like this. He says like this. First of all, if you want to invoke the sugya of who's better, Tzaddik Gamor or a Baal Tshuva, so then Aaron would be the Tzaddik Gamor and Moshe would be the Baal Tshuva. So how could they be equal? Miman of Shach. If you hold the Tzaddik Gamor is better, then Aaron is greater. If you hold the Baal Tshuva is greater, then Moshe is greater. One thing for sure is, there's no sheet in the Gemara, a Tzaddik Gamor is equal to a Baal Tshuva. One sheet is the Tzaddik Gamor is better, one sheet is the Baal Tshuva is better. So how could Moshe and Aaron be equal? Elamai, they're not. Because they were both Tzaddikim Gemurim from the time they were born. Miman of Shach, Ima Baal Tshuva Adavim Kein Eich Aaron Kamoshim, Tzaddik Gamor Eich Moshe Ka'aron. And if they're equal, that's not possible, because it says, Mitchilasim v'yat soifim, Nishneim shavim. Must be Moshe was good from the time he was born. And
but you see a difference. Moshe got angry a few times at Klal Yisrael, but Yehara never got angry with him. Yishalom, Oiv Shalom, Oiv Shalom. Moshe got angry a few times, but punish him because he got angry, he lost his cool.
So in a second, so he says, therefore it's mili dibadidusa hinenu, it's made up, it's above a maisa. And says the Tiferes, based on my limited knowledge of Torah, I do not know any source in any Chazal to this. But Chalila lahamin ba'adibazu, it's Lashon Hara, it's Charifos, and to believe in what the Tiferes Yisrael says. He says this matter should be erased and not said, and therefore your Megal is Chus Al Yidei Zaka, Hashem should lengthen your days. Okay. So now I just want to show you the title page, again, of the Sefer Kol Tiferes. Look at number 9. That he basically reiterates the fact that the Tiferes Yisrael brings this story, and he says it was a terrible sin. Whoever wrote that letter in the first place, will get terrible einish. And therefore, I try to print a booklet and to prove that this is a fabrication, but it didn't help because that letter spread across the whole world. But my kuntris had limited viewership and readership, and therefore I wanted to print it again. And he said, well, I know, and I called it Klil Tiferes. Why? Because it should be a crown to restore the greatness of the words of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. What did the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah write? They wrote, Yismach Moshe b'matnas chalkoi Klil Tiferes nasatalai. Now you'll say, well, how could the Tiferes Yisrael have made a mistake? So some people want to say, well, there's a Rishon that says it. So says the Klil Tiferes. Let me just show you how foolish it is to think that a Rishon says it. Look in the Shita Mekubetzes. They get it from the Shita Mekubetzes, the end of Perek Nedarim. But says the Klil Tiferes, it has absolutely nothing to do with the topic on hand. Okay. Let's look at the story that's actually found in our Svarim. To which he says, "V'nei shamati me'ez anashim shenimtza." I'm up to number 10. The Klil Tiferes writes I heard some people say that there's a shoresh in the Shittim Kumetzes, so let me copy over what the Shittim Kumetzes says, so you realize sort of how foolish it is. He says, Tiferes brings down, the Shittim Kumetzes brings down, Kehu ma'isa b'chacham echad, shalach demos partzufay l'chacham acher. Somebody sent a picture to another sage, shayamakar b'demos partzufin, someone who knew chachmas physiognomy. Nitman mivnei miviyusa say dahu partzuf. And he hid it. He covered it because he was embarrassed. L'soif shalai lama nitman mimenu. At the end, the Chacham said, "Why do you hide it?" But ano isay partzuf mi adam ra. He said that image was the image of a bad person. She'ein demusai. Kidmusai, there's nobody like him, Chemdan, who desires money, V'noyef, and an adulterer, V'listim, and a robber, V'ein lahabed love. V'hamaviyah, the one who brought in Nesyarim Milash V'aladonov. In other words, somebody sent to a physiognomist to read his, the lines of his face, and the Chacham responded, this guy is the biggest oisvarf. So the servant was embarrassed to send it back to him, because he was afraid of what he would say. V'shalai kol inyam v'amrlai, so the one whose picture it was said, you're right. It's all emes. The truth is, I'm a bad guy in heart. The Yetzer Hara arouses me. But my chachma stops me from this, and that's what holds me back. Quotes Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi. Okay, so what do we have over here? There was once a guy who was a good guy and had a bad nature. And that's what everybody says, oh, so we have the story in the Rishon. Yeah, that's very credible evidence. That's like New York Times evidence. What does this got to do with Moshe Rabbeinu? The fact that the Shittim Mekubetzes brought, once upon a time, there was somebody who had a bad picture and overcame it. Shkoyach, well, what's that got to do with Moshe Rabbeinu? If it was about Moshe Rabbeinu, you don't think the Shittim Mekubetzes would have said, this is Moshe Rabbeinu? The fact that he says it's a Chacham means some no-name guy that nobody ever heard of. So Tiferes says it's ridiculous to think that because a similar story is brought in the Tiferes is brought in the Shittim Mekubetzes, that's what we're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu. And then he thereby quotes at least a dozen sources in Shas that straight up contradict this story, which he claims comes from unauthentic sources. Let's read some of them. First, the Gemara in Soita, on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph Yud Beis Amud Beis. The Gemara says about Moshe Rabbeinu, we quoted the pasuk, "Vatera oisai ki toivu." So what does it mean ki toiv? Tanya, Rameir Omer, Toiv Shemai, his name was Toiv. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Tuvia Shemai. Rabbi Chemia Omer Hagun Lenavios, he was fit to be a Navi. Well, why was he fit to be a Navi? If he was naturally inclined to be a Noye for a Itzeach and a Ganav and a Chemdan and a Ba'agaiva, well, what made him fit to be a Navi? Others say he was Nog Shumal. The Gemara is Tiferes Hayelad Vatera Mi Boile. What's Vatirehu? Says she saw. What's Vatirehu? She saw the letter Hevav. Amar Rabbi Yisroel Chanin Sharasa Shchina Imai. Now, why is the Shechina hanging out with this kid who's inclined and destined to be the next, mobster? Chas v'shalom. That means that because B'teva, he had in him the Kedusha and the sanctity of a Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why. But it's more than that. Every single time the Zohar HaKadosh refers to Moshe Rabbeinu, look what the Zohar writes. I put on the sheet 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, at least 7 Zayars for your consumption. Look at number 13. And these are all quoted by the Sefer Kol Tiferes. Vayilach Ish, who's the man Amram. Vayikach es Vas Levi, Yocheved. Bas Kol Nachtis Va'amrislei, Liz Davgaba. So a Bas Kol proclaimed to be Mizdaveg, that the two should be Mizdaveg. Why? Because it came time for the Gula. V'kud Shabrichu Sayabe. Hashem assisted them. The Taninon, Shchinta Sharia al Arsayu V'riusa Delahayim B'davgusa Chada. The Shechina was there during their union. Chada Hava B'shchinta. The Alderach La Yisadi Shchinta. And the Shechina never ceased. Me'ahu Bra, the Oilida, from the kid that was born. L'kayama, to sustain it. The Sivis Kadishim Yisim Kadoshim. In other words, the Zohar says the Shechina did not cease from Moshe Rabbeinu from the time he was born. Or look at number 14. Rabbi Lezer Amar Zacha Amram Shetz Min Ben Shezacha L'Kol Gadol. Ta'ana on the third line. Kishenoilad Moshe Yiched HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shemai Olav. When time Moshe was born, Hashem was meyached his name on him. T'chsiv v'atera oisa ki toiv, uchsiv toiv Hashem la'koil, uchsiv tamuru ki toiv Hashem. So from the time that Moshe Rabbeinu was born, Hashem was meyached his name on him.
Maybe I don't see a contradiction. I mean, it could be had the great neshama, gewaldig neshama, but Hashem wanted to make it a human being still. He's not a malach, otherwise Hashem could send malachim. He's a human being with normal human tendencies, and that he overcame and made him even a greater God.
Again, this story is saying that he was more inclined.
He had these inclinations.
Again, this story is saying he was more inclined to sin than regular people. Right? And according to the Rambam, you're not supposed to be. According to the Rambam, it's not a maila. Or, yeah.
According to the first source, right? Could a goy go to the Machanesa?
That's what it says. Okay, look at number 15. Vayinages hatzayin achar hamidbar. Rabbi Yossi Amar Moshe miyoyim shenoilad lo yizaz mimenu ruach hakodesh. Moshe had ruach hakodesh on the time he was born. Well, how do you have ruach if he was an inclined murderer with every inclined towards sin? How does he have ruach hakodesh from the time he was born?
Has a potential.
It doesn't say he was, he had the koyach to have a lo yizaz mimenu ruach hakodesh.
So then you can ask him question: how do you marry someone that from Avodah Zorah? How do you promise that he's going to give first son to Avodah Zorah?
That's Stamakash. Look at number 16. Oz Yoshir Moshe Rabbi Huda Pasach B'terem etzarcha bebeten yidaticha. Before I formed you in your womb, I knew you. What does this mean? Tana b'hishaita demata zin the Moshe Neviah mehemna la'achta la'ama. When Moshe Rabbeinu came down to the world, ape kutcha brucha rucha kadisha megzera tisfiru de even tava the gan is the master rabban v'tamnai nahirin v'snair alei. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu, from the time he came down to this world, he was already crowned with spiritual greatness. Or here's another one. Look at number 17. We know that by all the tzaddikim, when their names appear twice, Avraham, Yaakov, Shmuel, there's a psik in between their names. Even by Hashem, there's a psik. Right in the Sefer Torah, Hashem. If you look in the Masaras, there's a psik. Going Avraham, Yaakov, Shmuel, except for Moshe, there's no psik. Why? My taima Avraham basra shlim kadmo shlim. In the end, he was whole. He didn't start off whole. He had to pass the tenes yonos. He didn't start off at Tzaddik Amor, Avraham. Only after his mind started to probe the greatness. Avraham was not born a mammon. That's what the Zohar says. That's why there's a psik. That the second Avraham was not the same as the first Avraham. Avraham in the end of his life was not the Avraham in the beginning of his life. Yaakov, in the beginning, he didn't have Yosef. In the end, Yosef was back. He had the Shechina again. Shmuel also. But Moshe, there is no psik. Why? Because Moshe was as great at the end of his life the same way as he was in the beginning of his life. Why? Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't like Avraham that he had to come to it and overcome. Moshe was, on Har Sinai, Moshe Rabbeinu in the crib is the same Moshe, says Zayar.
There's no Parshas that doesn't rhyme. You find in the story, you ran after that sheep. Hashem said, you worship, therefore you're roy to be a roy tzon klal Yisrael. She did pass through tests.
No, there were no tests. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have Nisyonos.
He did. Like, he ran after the sheep.
You saw he had 10 Nisyonos?
Is that the Bible says that?
Does it say Be'eser Nisyonos Nasnasa Moshe Rabbeinu?
They had Nisyonos.
Says the Zayar, to some degree, he's the same Moshe. Now, here's to me the clincher. That if you would have taken a picture of the time Moshe Rabbeinu was born, according to the Tiferes Yisroel, he looked like a bad guy. He looked like, him and all the people wanted in the post office. He looked like a bad cookie. Says the Pirkei Rabbi Lezer, Reb Nassan el Omer, Ra'u avoisav shel Moshe, ta'aroi shel Moshe kemalach Elokim. When Moshe was born, he looked like a heavenly angel. What, a heavenly angel that's inclined to be an Avaryan? What kind of heavenly angel? Which kind? Here's another one, which is, we'll end with this. We'll probably spend a few weeks on this. Yeah. Well, we're going to see which of the Rabbi Shiur Leib Diskin also was shredded this to pieces. But I just thought it was interesting.
Tiferes Yisroel's slow validity in this.
He was a great person also. How did you do it?
Okay. Yeah, Avoisav Shomasha. So here's the last one. There's a Zohar in the Idra Rabbah who says,
20?
Number 20, Amar Rab Shimon, Kulhu boitzinen chaveiren da'asyan b'hai izka kadisha. All of the holy lights that come, ashadna alei shemaya ilan dela'in v'ara kadisha, I bear to testimony from on high and down here, that I could see something that no one was able to see, says Rav Shimon Yochai. Miyayim d'salag Moshe zimna tinyano to the scene when Moshe Rabbeinu went up the second time, I could see more than anyone saw from the time Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai the second time. Da'anocha mina an pa'ina here, and I see my face shining. Kinahira de shimsha tekifa, like the sun that shines bright. The zamin l'meibak ba'asvasa la'alma, that's destined to go out to the world. But even Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know his face was shining. Like we learned this morning in the Gemara in Be'ah, right? The Gemara derives, U'Moshe lo yada ki karan arpanav. What do we see from there? That if you give, the Gemara tried to derive from there, that if you give your friend a present, you don't have to let them know. The Gemara eventually fell off of that. So it says Rav Shimon Yochai, I'm greater than Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu didn't realize his face was shining, and I do. So 1 second. So that means Rav Shimon Yochai is saying he's greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. Maybe we have something over here. Because Rav Shimon Yochai says, I knew something Moshe didn't know. So the Tiferes says something. He says, many want to learn from here that Rav Shimon Yochai is being mispar, he's greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. But it says the Tiferes, no, they're not correct.
Read it in the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have the Torah to read. So
Yeah,
why is that making greater than Moshe? He had a source that Moshe didn't have.
Yeah, but Moshe Rabbeinu could not detect on his face that it was shining. Rav Shimon Yochai could. So he says the pshat is like that. What Rav Shimon Yochai is saying is he's misoynein, that he's not on the madrega of Moshe. The Chazal say, Shraga b'tiara mayahani. A torch in the day, it doesn't help. It doesn't help to turn on the lights during the daylight. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu, he's been shining since he was born. From the moment he was born, Vatero Isakitav, he was shining. Kishinasmala kalabais oira. Avavade b'shas matan Torah. He was zoicha to more light. And therefore, when his face was shining, Moshe Rabbeinu could not detect it. So he wasn't margish. But the Tana, Rav Shimon Yochai, his neshama wasn't on the madrega Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why he was margish in the light. And also, b'chlal, it has to be what the Zohar Kadosh means. We'll conclude with this. Gam min yanish amayla nilmud shekavanas Rav Shimon Yochai l'soinen al shleizacha l'maylas Moshe Rabbeinu. Sharei mimaymer hazel lamadnu shemoshe Rabbeinu l'shalom hisig kisha'ala l'kabel luchas harishonos yoser havi mashe hizbel yasv pam shniya l'kabel. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu received more and achieved more by the luchas rishonos than by the luchas shniyos. V'gam gedolei hador hahu zachu gam ken lahasig b'Torah be'isha ala Moshe b'pam rishona yoser mashe hizbel pam shniya. The gedolim received more also the first time. So matzina b'maimer hazeh shamar da'anoch chamei hashta ma'shaloi chamei barnash miyam d'sag Moshe zimna tinyana. What this means is that his kavana is I was masig more now than Moshe, than a regular person received in the midbar by the second time Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai. But no way am I masig what the Gedolei Hadar received the first time that Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai. So that's pshat. And now, so what do we see from all this? So you say the Tiferes Yisroel believed it. The bottom line is, as we'll see, it's mavur b'kama chazal. The problem is not that it's not possible for a person to have bad tendencies and overcome it. It's definitely possible. And it's not that it's impossible that some tzaddikim that we've had maybe had natural tendencies l'ra, and they overcame it. The reason why this is impossible is because some things are impossible when they're false, and this is false because Chazal say not like it, and that's it. The Zohar says, the Pirkei Rebbe says, when Moshe Rabbeinu was born, he looked like a Malach Halakim. He didn't look like what it says in some ancient Christian document that he looked like a bad guy. And B'chal, we'll see, the whole story is very hard to accept. We'll see over the next couple of weeks. But L'maisa, the Aderes says that it's a Chalila to believe in such a thing, and we'll see many other Gedolim also did not accept this story. Rabbi said, have a great shot.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.